cool! That's right, boys. Mondo cool.
Ys I II Chronicles is an action-based retro-style RPG and is the most recent remake of several remakes of the original Ys I and II, originally released for the PC-88 back in 1987. This game is developed by Falcom and published by XSEED Games. Ys I and II follow our protagonist, Adol Christian, who will remain the protagonist of nearly every Ys game with the exception of Ys Origin. Adol is also for the majority of the series a silent protagonist, which includes Ys I and II themselves. As such, Adol has no personality, but this ties in perfectly with the feeling of a traditional style game that Ys I and II tries to capture. It's also revealed in future installments that the reason Adol is a silent protagonist is because the stories of these games in the series are literally books written by Adol himself, and he excludes his personal interpretation in order to retell the events in the most objective way possible, which is admittedly a very unique way of going about it. Ys I and II both have fairly simple storylines. There's probably only one plot twist between both games that I can think of, but don't take this as me bashing the story. The simplicity is part of the retro style charm, which is especially good because of XSEED's fantastic localization. Everything is very well written and gives off a sense of cleanliness and polish. Also, it's important to note that these two games are bundled together for a reason. Ys II takes place right after the ending of Ys I, so it's highly advised to play through Ys I first before jumping into Ys II. I know that sounds self-explanatory, but I thought I'd make the distinction either way. If you're a lover of 2D visuals, such as myself, Ys I and II Chronicles is simply eye candy. All of the environments and character sprites are simply gorgeous and crammed with detail. All of the areas are distinct and with appropriate color palettes. The character portraits are also fantastically drawn to give some visual depth to some of the sprites. If I had one complaint about the visuals, it would probably just be some of the animations. They are somewhat stiff. But aside from that, this game looks phenomenal. The music for both Ys I and II respectively are simply put amazing. After watching this review, I highly recommend looking up some tracks, such as First Step Towards Wars, To Make the End of Battle, Shrine of Solomon, Palace of Destruction, and Subterranean Canal. Another great thing is that the game allows you to choose between different versions of the soundtrack from previous versions of these games, in case you want something a little bit different. Personally, I mostly just stuck with the Chronicles version of the soundtrack because I really love the instrumental work, but it's definitely a really neat feature either way. Ys is known for its great music, and it's so good to see that the trend started even with the very first games in the series, and that Falcom JDK band were able to breathe new life into these old tracks. This is a truly phenomenal soundtrack, and it's worth owning on its own. Now, for what is easily the most divisive aspect of Ys I and II Chronicles, we have the combat system, where instead of manually attacking enemies, you literally have to bump into them and Adol slashes his sword automatically. Just by that description alone, I'm sure some people can realize why this wouldn't appeal to everyone. When I first started playing the game, I was admittedly turned off by the combat as well. However, as I got into it, I realized that this is just part of the charm of Ys I and II Chronicles. This is a fairly faithful remake of the original game. It's transferred over this old system to truly capture what it is to play old games like these. These games have new coats of paint, but the core of what made these games 2 decades ago remains intact. And that's just something that you're either going to love or hate depending on what your leanings are. Ys I and II is for retro gamers through and through, and if you're not a retro gamer, this simply isn't going to appeal to you. Now, getting off that, there actually is more to the combat than just bumping into enemies. In both Ys I and II, you gain XP by defeating enemies, which allows you to level up. It seems fairly standard at first. However, in Ys I specifically, you can only reach level 10, and that's it. Even on the normal difficulty, this can make the game extremely challenging. As a result, I felt that Ys I compared to Ys II, which I couldn't even reach the level cap by the end of that game, I think I was like level 52, was much more challenging. That isn't to say that Ys II is easy, because it's not. That game was definitely challenging in its own right. but I definitely felt that the first Ys was a tougher game. Another interesting difference between the two games is that Adult in Ys I can equip different rings that give him different buffs. Ys II, however, has no rings and instead has a magic system. The magic system adds a lot more to the gameplay, particularly during boss fights, since the majority of the boss fights in that game can only be defeated with the fireball spell, as opposed to the bump system, which was the only method of attack in the original game. The bosses, by the way, are easily the highlight of both games. If you enjoy a good challenge, the boss fights in Ys I and 2 are definitely going to give you a run for your money. There were times where I had to retry certain boss fights multiple times before I could defeat them. More times than I'd care to admit, or even remember for that matter, since I retried so many times with certain bosses. It was definitely some of the most fun I had playing the games, as they were challenges I won't soon forget. In particular, Dark Fact, the final boss of Ys I, definitely the hardest boss between both games. Ys I II Chronicles is a love letter to retro gamers. If you love traditional style RPGs, especially in terms of its narrative and its aesthetic, Ys I II Chronicles does not disappoint. This definitely isn't for everyone. I would say if you're not a retro gamer, it's simply not going to appeal to you. But if you are, and you haven't played these games, you are certainly missing out on what is charming, challenging, but ultimately fun experiences. This has been Shintai, everyone. Take care. Shameless self-promotion, yeah. So for this review, this was actually a request by one of my subscribers. His name is Zero. He's been wanting me to review this for a while now, and there was actually tons of shit that happened with this review that I wasn't able to do it. But I finally got around to it, and dude, I hope it was worth the wait. I hope you enjoyed the review. Since this is an Ys game, of course, gotta show you guys some other Ys games that I've reviewed. Here I have Ys I II Chronicles on the left. Ys I II Chronicles is awesome. Check that out. And on the right, Ys VII, which I reviewed with my buddy Swagman. Check that shit out. Awesome game too. Again, Zero, hope this was worth the wait, man. Peace.